Welcome back. Ed Martin here on the Pro America Report. I've been telling you about this interview all show long because I've been waiting for it. And it's the most important story I've seen in, I don't know, a long, long time. It's bigger than any of the Russia hoax breaking, all this stuff, because this has revealed what I have been arguing that's going to happen, that the big tech companies are not going to leave it to chance. They're going to put their thumb on the scale. And so our next guest is Allum Bokhari, who is a journalist over at Breitbart. I've read his stuff for years. He's on Twitter at Libertarian Blue. I don't know. We'll get into that later. At Libertarian Blue, maybe the blue check or something. But he's a great writer and an investigative journalist. And the piece that I want to talk to him about is the title is Election Interference: Google Purges Breitbart from Search Results. So first of all, welcome, Allum. How are you today?
I'm good, Ed. Great to be on. Thank you for the invite.
Well, thanks for coming on. And before we get totally into this article, let me ask you this way. This is like, how did you know? So the premise of this is, and we'll get into the details, is that Google has changed their search results to drop Breitbart out of them. Now, I've heard about this for years because I'm a friend of the Gateway pundit, Jim Hoft. He's been complaining about Facebook doing that to him. So I know the idea, but it's almost like the dog that didn't bark. How did you know that there was something wrong to go back and look? Was it suddenly like, you could just tell crickets, or you know what I mean? How did somebody realize something changed that you went to look for it?
Well, we first got a suspicion, much in the same way that Gateway Pundit writers got a suspicion that this was happening, by when we search for our own headlines in Google search, oftentimes they wouldn't come up, which is very, very strange. When you search for that exact string of characters, it should bring up the article straight away. Instead, what sometimes happens is, what often happens, increasingly happens, is that other people doing rewrites of our articles will appear at the top of the search results, and the Breitbart links are nowhere to be found. So we talked to some SEO experts. We looked at various analytic tools, including Google's own analytics tools, which showed us traffic from various search terms, and the results were incredible. So since 2017, and this is the number I want your listeners to remember. Since 2017, Breitbart News' visibility on Google search results has gone down 99.7%. 99.7%. That's not an exaggeration. It's now 0.3% what it was in the run-up to the 2016 election. It's a massive, massive reduction, and it has nothing to do with the volume of our content that's gone up. It has nothing to do with the SEO quality of our website, because we've looked at third-party tools. We've looked at Google's own analytics tools. We're actually above CNN and many mainstream sites in terms of the SEO quality of Breitbart. So nothing to do with that. 99.7%. And one other thing we noticed is that with the recent update to Google search, traffic from search terms related to Biden and Joe Biden completely flatlined. It's gone to zero. And that doesn't happen organically. Someone we're talking about someone flipped. So we're talking about Allum Bokhari, and I can tell you this from my experience. I've known him for a few years, mostly through his reporting, and some of it's been on a lot of it's been on the tech stuff. As somebody that's actually watched the tech stuff, I remember you were doing something, or you were asking questions and had a source, I think, in Twitter maybe about how do they pick blue checks and all. So this is sort of your niche. I mean, maybe not only your niche, but you're in this space. But Allum, when I look at the article, and I'll put it up on social media, the Breitbart article that Allum Bokhari wrote called "Election Interference: Google Purges Breitbart from its Search Results." When you see the graphs, so it's the data. Here's a search, here's a search, here's a search, is about this level, and then suddenly the graph drops off, boom, and it goes down to almost nothing or nothing. Now, did they change? I mean, how stupid do they think we are? How bold are they? You wouldn't not notice it. And so is there an answer in your mind? Are they just saying, frankly, we don't care what you think. We got the power. We're going to do it. Is that what it looks like? It looks like that. Is that what it is? Yeah, I think they've become completely, exactly right. I think they've become completely brazen at this point. We also see platforms like Twitter and Twitch, which is owned by Amazon. They openly censor the president. I think it was Twitch that banned the president's entire account for a set period of time. So they feel they can just do this and get away with it, because in large part they can. I mean, you look at the antitrust hearing today on Capitol Hill, all the tech CEOs up before the antitrust committee. The Democrats are asking tougher questions than the Republicans. So these tech companies know they can count on Republicans to defend them, even when they're censoring the president, censoring his supporters, and suppressing conservative websites.
And Allum, again, Allum Bokhari, and the article I'll put up on social media: election interference. Google purges Breitbart from the search results. It's Breitbart.com. What happens when you ask Google? Like I remember asking Jim Hoft, the Gateway pundit, when Facebook was jerking his chain, and they really did. They took away 50 or 60% of his traffic because he was using Facebook to get people to take a look. When you do contact Google, because an online news site like Breitbart, which has been around for years now and has built up a following and a relationship and lots of things. When you contact them and you ask them, do they say, oh, periodic update of the algorithm? Do they say nothing? Do they smile and say, well, we had to change our... What kind of answer do you get, or do you get no answer?
We normally get an answer, and it's normally just some boilerplate corporate statement denying they've done anything wrong, saying, this is totally normal. As you said, just a regular update, affects many sites, not just you. And this is the way of doing plausible deniability, right? So when Facebook when Facebook introduced an algorithm change back in 2018, I think it was, that cut engagement on President Trump's page by almost 50%. The way they rolled it out was they said, well, this is just a way to make sure people see more posts from their friends and family and less from public figures and brands. And what that actually did was massively hit conservative websites and Trump himself. And that, Google does the same thing. They'll introduce a broad algorithm change and claim it's not targeted at anyone specifically, but somehow conservative websites always end up the biggest losers. What really, the final detail in this picture is that we know Google went into absolute panic mode after the 2016 election because we got a 1-hour recording of their executives reacting to that election result, showing total dismay. The co-founder saying the result offended them. Another executive saying he wanted to make the populist movement a blip in history. And other Google executives have been caught saying they don't want 2016 to happen again. So their intentions are very, very clear. And by the way, people inside Facebook tell me similar things about that company and how they reacted to the 2016 election. So we know what their agenda is. They felt terrible after 2016. They felt they didn't do enough to stop Donald Trump, and they're not going to let it happen again in 2020. And frankly, given the amount of control these guys have over our information, the amount of personal data they have, and the ability that gives them to manipulate us, manipulate our views, our voting decisions, they could have an enormous impact on the 2020 election.
We're talking with Allum Bokhari, and again, he's over at Breitbart.com, one of the writers there, tech writer, among other things, and his piece is up as Election Interference. Google purges Breitbart from search results. Okay, Allum, it's not your job as a reporter necessarily or an analyst to say what should be done. On the other hand, you're also part of a journalistic effort, and you're saying, hey, what are we doing? And what are the range of solutions? When people say, how do you fix this? Libertarians will say, oh, don't mess with the market. Let's start our own. Well, I don't, you can't get to scale fast enough to beat the voice right now. So what are the range of things we could do? And are there people, you mentioned the Democrats today in the hearings earlier today, they were more serious, in some ways, harder questions than the Republicans were. What are the possible solutions and ways to address this? And are there real serious efforts to make those possibilities come to pass?
Yeah, and also there are some exceptions. I mean, Matt Gaetz and Paul Gosar have always been very tough on the tech companies, Louis Gohmert as well. There are exceptions, but from the broader Republican Party, they just ignore it, or they make excuses or try and defend the tech giants. So I think, there are several issues here. The Democrats are quite good on pressing these companies on general antitrust issues, on privacy issues sometimes, but they're terrible on the question of censorship. In fact, Democrats use these tech companies to censor their critics. They pressure them to do even more censorship than these tech companies would otherwise do. So you can't rely on Democrats for that. That's where you need the Republican Party. But so many Republicans and so many conservative think tanks are, on the take from these tech companies. Google and these other companies have flooded conservative think tanks with donations, including the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, many others. So the conservative grassroots, before they can take on the tech giants, almost need to take back the Republican Party, make it unacceptable to take money from these companies, and make it unacceptable for them to just, take a weak free market defense of these companies. Because on that point, it's a totally bogus argument that mainly comes from institutions that have been co-opted by the tech giants. There's free marketing, you have to leave it alone. These companies owe their position to special government handouts in the 1990s that make them immune from certain types of lawsuits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the bigger thing on this, it doesn't matter how we got here. We're here now, and that question is, what do we do about it? I mean, my opinion is, at this point, you can say what you wish. If we'd done something different earlier, I agree with you. Most of these companies, and that's why I've changed my tune a little bit. Again, we're talking to Allum Bokhari of Breitbart.com. I've changed my tune. I don't really care about regulating, changing 230, Section 230, and trying to regulate these giants, because you know what? I know what happens when you're big and you get regulated, you win. And the best example for people to think about that is our hospital systems. The biggest hospital systems were happy to get in a room with Obama and make Obamacare benefit them. So there's 20 hospital systems that are squeezing everybody because they're big enough. And if you take the big tech, four big tech, and they say, hey, regulate, they'll say, okay, watch us. We'll have more lobbyists, more congressmen, more people. So I think you got to go and get your mind around some theory of antitrust and break these things up. It's a hard thing to do, but otherwise we're losing. Look, in the last 24 hours, they took away our right to see doctors talk about hydroxychloroquine. Whether you agree with it or not, we had a right to see it. They took away, we now know, Breitbart's ability to communicate on the center right? They take away voices willy-nilly, whether you like Alex Jones or not. My point is the targets are there. We have so little control now over what is effectively the communication oxygen that we breathe. So we got to do something, or we can say, well, America was a really cool republic and it's now run by Silicon Valley. And that's how I feel about it. So, Allum, what's the reaction been to this story? To me, it looks like the most important story in the history of tech. And then again, I look and say, New York Times isn't writing about it. I mean, nobody's picked it up. What's the reaction been to this story?
Well, the problem is the mainstream media loves tech censorship because it gets rid of their competitors, and Democrats like it too because it gets rid of their political competitors. There's been a very good reaction from the conservative movement. I think most grassroots conservatives recognize there's a problem, and some Republican lawmakers are starting to get the message as well. In the beginning it was just people like Cruz and Gomert and Gates and Gosar. Then there was Blackburn, then Hawley joined the Senate. Now Loeffler is talking about it. So there's some movement. It's still not happening very, very quickly on the legislative side of things. Trump's brought in his executive order as well. But it's certainly going to be a slow process, I think. And it needs to speed up because, as you said, the U.S. really descending into oligarchy where we're ruled. Our political discourse, our elections are ruled by this group of unaccountable corporate elites.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to go far we have to imagine it now. I mean, look, when you go look at this article, I'm talking to the listeners, you wrote it, Allum, but you go look at this article and look at the graphs and you realize and think to yourself as you watch this, the graph goes from whatever level you want to say it was, whether it was enough or not, but in 2017 down to nothing. And basically that's not, I'm not even talking about your business model, although I care about that because I think I'm talking about Breitbart.com has been a voice on the center right that hasn't existed, and they're cutting it out. I mean, it takes your breath away to realize it. All right, Allum, I got to run. Allum Bokhari, and we'll put it all up on social media. Keep us in the loop on this story. It's so important, and we'll look forward to it. I mean, we got to hope and pray that some people step up and lead on this because it's so important. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, we'll take a quick break and be right back. It's Ed Martin here on the Pro America Report. Back in a moment.